My name's Sophie Duncan and I'm here with my colleague Paul Manners, and we are hosting the session today. And in a moment, we're going to be talking with Karen Salt. She's going to be sharing some of her perspectives with you, and we're really looking forward to hearing from her. But before we do that, we thought that we wanted to do two things. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to thank the team behind Engage. Often this gets left as an afterthought at the end of a session, and I really wanted just to make a public statement that this conference has been a huge task undertaken by a load of people who have put a huge amount of energy, effort, thought and care into the conference. So I just wanted to thank the NCCP team and the associates that we've co-opted to work with us to deliver the conference. And so that's Maddie, who's really masterminded everything behind the scenes and has led our brilliant networking sessions. It's Jules, it's Jack, Emma, Alyssa, Sian, Victoria, Manjula, Kaylee, Karen, and the marvelous Jamie, who we've co-opted into supporting all the technical stuff behind the scenes and makes us the whole thing look really professional. And it's great to have had your help and support, and thank you for the effort and time you've put into it. And I hope that it's meant that our delegates have had a fantastic time connecting with others and haven't had to worry about all of those other things, that all they've had to worry about is learning, listening and sharing their great expertise and knowledge. So before I hand over to Karen, I thought I'd like to invite our workshop leaders to share whether what they've got out from their workshop. So I don't know if any of you would like to pop into chat something you've learned through your workshops, or an action that's come out of your workshops that either you are going to take or you think is something we could collectively take. And so I invite you to pop your hand up if you'd like to participate. It would be great to hear from you. And if you don't want to speak out into the full conference, I know some people have felt a bit shy of doing that, then do feel free to pop it into chat. And immediately I see Samantha, your hand is up, so let's go to you. And if you're able, please do put your video on. We'd love to see you.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so we've just been in the workshop around finding the power and empowerment. And we had loads of great questions, practical questions about how to support PhD students engaging with patient and public involvement and co-production. So I think some people took away some really practical tips, but also as a collective, I really felt that we all took on or have taken away this idea that we need to really think about the word empowerment. When we're using it, what does it mean and where does the power sit? So I think that was a collective, just really thinking about how we use that word empowerment and what do we actually mean? Where is that power for someone to be empowered?
Brilliant. Thank you, Samantha. What a great thing for us to take away and reflect on. Brilliant. Any other workshop leaders want to contribute at this point? David, I see your hands up. Great. Welcome to the stage.
Hi, Sophie. Hi, everyone. We were looking at leadership development in outreach and public engagement, which has been a theme at the conference. I can see on the Padlet there's lots of actions about going beyond hero stories, creating spaces for others to flourish, self-care. So the question we were looking at is, how do we expect this to happen, and what support is out there for leaders at all levels within the system? In terms of actions, there were lots, they're all on the Padlets, but maybe a couple to highlight. Do we need a community of practice around outreach and public engagement leadership specifically? That was suggested. It was definitely suggested that there was more work to do around structures. So not so much the leadership development side, but thinking about the short-term contracts, the support needed for navigating internal structures, providing space for this, career progression, embracing the concept of third space professionals was one of the notes that came from the discussion, and just generally building up our knowledge about what support works best in this space.
Brilliant. Thanks, David, for a great summary and some brilliant actions there. And I'm already loving the idea of participating in a community of practice around leadership. I think, interestingly, for those who were at the plenary yesterday, we had 6 people come together, 1 by video, the other 5 live, talking about their perspectives and stories of leadership. And they, as a group, said how wonderful it was just to be a little community of practice, just for a moment together to hear each other's perspectives. So I think that thing about creating spaces to develop those ideas and thinking is brilliant. And I see, Lynette, you've added in the chat, one action I'll be definitely taking forward is making time to talk to colleagues about how we build equality and inclusion in our practice. It's easy to get bogged down with day-to-day work and not make time for more grand ambitions and ideals. And Lynette, I think a lot of people share that feeling. And I often think, you know, coming together at Engage, it's a kind of chance to take a kind of collective breath and properly reflect on our work, to hear from our peers about what they're doing, and to sharpen our thinking and our approach. So I'd encourage you to take that time to reflect. It really helps enhance our practice. And Claudia is saying, my action will be to be deliberate in calling out unfairness and do better for our students and communities. Yeah, and absolutely that's that challenge of calling out. Brilliant. Oh gosh, and then Cassie's calling out about the work that Faye described. So for those of you who are able to join us on the first day of the conference, Faye Scott from NIHR, their Centre for Engagement and Dissemination, shared their race equality framework. And she called out for people to become early adopters of the framework, and also invited us to find out more about what they're doing. Right, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who I hope will introduce Karen, who's our closing keynote.
Great, thank you very much, Sophie. And Karen, it is so wonderful to welcome you to Engage. I just thought it was important to just tell you a little bit about Karen's role, Deputy Director for Research and Development, Culture and Environment at UKRI, and that is a huge brief. It's bringing together teams working on ethics, research integrity, research and innovation culture, equality, diversity and inclusion, and open research. And she's also the senior level policy lead there on trusted research, leading on integrated program of work to safeguard the security and integrity of international collaborations and partnerships. And all of that, Karen, we've been talking about for the last 2 days. So it's wonderful to have you here. We've worked together for a number of years. When Karen was at the University of Nottingham, she was part of a wonderful team on the Common Cause project, funded by AHRC. It was exploring where and how common cause can be made between change agents in universities, communities and funding bodies to create knowledge that's fully reflective of the cultures and experiences of UK's Black and minority ethnic communities. It's a wonderful piece of work. And if you go to our Slack channel, you can see the report and the principles which have been really, really instructive for us, and I know for many others. So Karen, it's fantastic. We've invited you to reflect on the theme of leading and engaging for purposeful change. So over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with me. And I want to thank the team for reaching out and giving me this really kind invitation. I'm both galvanized and excited to join and to have so many folks in no matter what circumstance or even place that they're living in able to participate. But I would be remiss if I didn't say I miss face-to-faces. I miss the energy in the room. I miss the, being able to see everybody's faces, because right now I have a big screen of me mainly. I kind of know what I look like. I have some tiny people in tiny, tiny little boxes, which is good to see. So I know that there are folks there. But I like playing upon the crowd. I like being able to chat and feel your energy. But I will confess that the thing I really miss is moving. So I'm a movement speaker who likes to storytell and kind of wander about a bit. So I will try my best to do my wandering, but sat still in front of a camera so that you can all see me and we can engage. It's been a tough year though. I mean, I think we, or a few years, I think we need to, start this conversation really acknowledging the transformative work that many of you have been involved in, which might have entailed stopping huge programs of work and activity that you had planned, and immediately having to find completely different ways of trying to do that work. Some of it that you may have had to let go completely because there was just no way to try to modify it moving forward. Others of you who have found yourself having to divide your time and actually pick up other sets of activities or cover for other colleagues or deal with other caring or family or community or other sets of responsibilities, and just adding that on top of your own anxieties, possibly about your job or about work or about communicating and interacting with others, and the challenge of trying to maintain that sense of kind of positivity, and that sense of energy. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about a whole range of other societal issues. Yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that is having huge economic, social, familial, health consequences for people who've lost, lost loved ones, that they're not ever actually be able to come together and celebrate, all the way through to people not being able to travel and to engage and interact or even celebrate some of the important milestones, and the stop-start of being able to transition and trying to find kind of new ways of connecting. But then we've had these moments of immense creativity and really just sort of, thinking about accessibility and inclusion in ways that have just transformed how we've done some of our work and what that has entailed. But we've also been dealing with the realities of a climate crisis, and a significant shift globally in lots of different places, where folks have been thinking a lot about racial inequality, systemic bias, and that's been an ongoing set of concerns for many, but this has transitioned into a lot of organizational planning now and organizational thinking, and also translated into commitments and thinking about how do you actually put this into place while we're also dealing with precarity and uncertainty of futures. And some of you may be working in particular organizations and environments right now where sustainability, financial sustainability is a concern. So it's quite deep, right? There's a lot happening. And I think it's really easy in the midst of all of that to sort of, sometimes to start to go, this is almost too much to start to unpack and kind of deal with, because everything feels like it's on fire. But I've also at the same time, I have literally been amazed and just, I think, inspired by the community sharing groups that have popped up in all sorts of places, where folks have been able to come together and create new knitting clubs and reading groups online, and or those who've just gone around knocking on doors and helping those who are elders to be able to get their shopping or their food, who might have been shielding. I mean, I've just seen this groundswell of connectivity and engagement, really, that is inspiring. And I think, for me, I would like to step into this little bit of space in this moment, not to sort of kind of go into this is how you lead and leadership-y kind of stuff and not acknowledge any of that, because that would just seem ridiculous, right? We need to acknowledge the types of things that we've been grappling with over the years. But I also think there is a moment of reflection, a moment of sort of taking stock of kind of where we are, where we'd like to go, how we'd like to do that. And that to me is one of the gifts, if there is any kind of a gift, in terms of what the pandemic has done, is it's given us the permission to be able to take these sorts of moments and really think about not just rebuilding our worlds, but reimagining them, I think, in ways that are transformative from at various different scales. And so I'm going to talk a little bit with you today about those scales and about those levels. Paul, bless him, talked about the Common Cause Research Project, and I love that project. It's one of my favorite to reflect on. It's one of my favorite to talk to people about, because essentially, and I've said this to many of you, maybe even at a prior time, it was essentially a project that started off with a number of different people asking slightly different questions at the same time. My question was, I had just become a principal investigator of a fairly large, for at least in my field, kind of £750,000 grant. And I was just like, where are the other Black women who are leading these grants across the research and innovation system? I wanted to learn about their practice. I wanted to get a sense of how are they leading and bringing multi-sided, multi-communities together and really transforming. And as I was asking these questions, to others who were involved in both Connected Communities projects, which is an AHRC program, and other sets of things. Others were asking different sets of questions around cultural organizations, around community involvement, community engagement, community-led and community understood kind of activities. And we were able to kind of coalesce and bring things together. And what was really quite fundamental about a very organic project that was inquisitive, it was also one where we were really, really committed to thinking about what our practice was. Every single day, every time we met, and talked about this project and did stuff. And so, yes, you've got these fantastic outputs, and there's these beautiful films and the posters, and even now the community networks that are continuing to go forward, that are led by the communities and advanced by them. But the thing that really excites me about that project was the interrogation of practice that was kind of fundamental to how we did our work. We really wanted to think about that and think really concretely. And that's kind of my segue into talking to you guys today. I've got a title that I've now thought through for this segment and for the session, which doesn't take away the beautiful title that has been presented to you. But I feel like we're at this moment where we need to be thinking from action to practice. And I've been talking about practice for a really long time, and really centering it in terms of what we do. And so I want to really try to interrogate and think about, from action to practice, and sort of leading and engaging for purposeful change. How do you do that? How do you do that with intention? And really let that intentionality really come through. This isn't about, you shouldn't create sets of commitments, or you shouldn't galvanize and create kind of outputs and bring people together and think about objectives. I'm not anti KPIs or key performance indicators, but I'm also really committed to thinking about how I do my work every day. From the most simple types of things that I'm involved in to the most complicated, and really thinking through the sets of, almost kind of processes that I need to engage in to I think do this work really with not just purpose, but I think a kind of ethics at its core. So I've got kind of 4 parts that I want to take you through, and part of it is just to sort of think with you around how would we move from this kind of action to practice. Now, it may seem like an odd kind of movement, but there is some intentional understanding in my head about trying to move into a more practice-oriented type of work, as opposed to sitting at the action stage. And the first obvious one for me are plans. I think you should put everything on Padlet and continue to do what you have been encouraged by our fearless conference organizers and Unconference folks to really start to think about. But I'm quite cautious about the seductiveness of plans, in that sense of, you write them all down, you put them all together, you stick them all, they have a nice title, you get the nice font, and it all looks grand and fantastic as a plan. It gives you a sense of accomplishment to be able to even articulate it and write it down, and it should. Being able to create these sorts of plans are an important first step, but my goodness, are they not the actual work itself? They are a list or a set of bullet points or a set of possibilities, but the work underneath that is extensive that needs to happen. And so we need to do more to turn our plans into transformations, right? That's where the power is. If we can see those sorts of plans as transformations and understand that transformations may feel uncomfortable and painful and difficult to do. They're not going to be fuzzy and fantastic because you've used all the right pretty words, or you've brought the right set of people together, you think, or you've done it with your heart on the right side of the angels. It still may be difficult. And that's the beauty of transformation, is transformation it's not obligated to give you nice in terms of being able to have these sorts of transitions. And that is fundamental, especially when we're grappling with sets of things where there are tensions or systemic sets of injustices, or things encoded in the systems and the structures that we work in, which means that you're going to have to battle through those to be able to actually get yourself to a place where you can actually have a transformation even happen. So the message takeaway from that: plans, okay, they will not get you to the transformation, right? We need to do more. And so what's that next step that I would recommend moving forward? And again, I've continued to really think about this in multiple ways. And one that I said that has really galvanized me is starting to think about practice. I have methods, I have tools in my little toolbox, I have various different sorts of approaches, but I really do fundamentally believe about this practice, and I use practice in multiple ways. One is that I think of it as if I was a curator or an artist, that I have a practice in terms of what I do. I mean, most of you are creative professionals, and you will likely think of this similarly. It was great to hear Sophie talk about almost from the start here about practice and thinking about that as an engagement practitioner, and the rest of you who might support that larger umbrella. But I also think of practice as something that you have to practice. And you do need to engage in it in that same way that if you were a person learning the piano or any other kind of instrument or any other type of craft, you needed to do it super poorly for a really long time before you got better at it. So yes, there's that aspect of practice, but I'm also really pushing even further with practice, because for me, part of it is that we've got to this moment. I mean, this is 2021, right? Lots of what we're talking about when we're talking about, massive transformations within society or various forms of injustice or sets of problems, they didn't start yesterday. They didn't just sort of like crack open and suddenly it's because this one person's in power, or this system didn't have the right KPI, or they didn't celebrate the right event. That is not what we're talking about. Racism didn't start because somebody didn't have a holiday or a month of celebration, right? So if you then start to think, I'm going to tackle racism by having a month of celebration or whatever it might be, it probably starts to sound a bit illogical, doesn't it? So when you're starting to think about these plans, it's really important to start to recognize that what we're actually talking about is the accretion of decades, centuries, long periods of time where there have been various ways of relating and interacting that have embedded themselves across cultures and societies. So that means you actually have to spend an incredible amount of time unlearning stuff. Really dismantling things, and you could really be the most committed, most magnificent person, and I'm just going to make all of you committed and magnificent people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to tackle all of these things and be able to do it in a way that ultimately you will be able to look at it and say, yes, that is inclusive every single second. And actually what you should be doing is actually going, I need to constantly interrogate what I do. I need to constantly interrogate how I engage. How do I walk into a room? Who do I see and who I don't see? How do I actually just head any letter that I send to somebody? Who are the people that I presume are engaged in what they are doing? How do you walk a room? How do you walk a space? How do you invite people in? And really the fundamentals of actually trying to figure that out is it's actually quite illuminating to me that I can get a letter from someone inviting me to something and engage with me and want to have interactions. And this is not implicating Sophie and Paul, but I can get a letter with someone wanting to invite me to a meeting, and they have no ability to sit down. Once I say, oh, it'd be great to do that. Let's talk about this invitation. And I go, how many people of X background have you invited to also participate in this meeting? Who's in attendance? They get uncomfortable. Some do, and they don't quite know how to have this conversation. And I'm like, well, I'm sure you've invited me because I'm magnificent. But you may have also thought, who's the Black female leaders that I know that I'd like to have? And I'm like, you should feel adult enough to have this conversation with me, that actually says you're going to be, intentional about your practice. That doesn't mean anyone's calling people out. It means we're doing this with intentionality, because the reverse is horrible. So let me give you what the reverse also looks like, which is a note that comes into me from someone from across various sectors that says, I'm doing an event, Karen, in X a number of days, and I'm trying to find X amount of people of X background who can attend. Because that to me is not practice, right? That is not practice, because that's horrible. But then the folks who are looking for people that they would like to attend, and they're Googling them to then try to do some presumption of difference that they think they can physically see. And then they're inviting those folks. And I see this all over the place, from various different types of organizations, folks who I know would not want to engage this way, but they feel like they're pressured. They feel like they're and they're driven by inclusion. Inclusion is the motivation, but the practice is so sloppy that it's one of those things that, again, you need to start asking yourself, who's your circle? How are you expanding it? How are you growing it? How are you engaging with people? How are you doing things that are helping to enlarge and expand the connections that you're making across the piece? And then starting to figure out, do you ask particular sets of questions? Are you feeling comfortable even asking those questions? What are the ways that you might need to think about how you frame and actually engage in discourse with people? And again, this isn't to say that we shouldn't create inclusive events, right? This is actually to say there are fundamental aspects to these that ultimately you have to practice this form of inclusion and really start thinking really quite critically about not just the language that we use, but also how we engage and interact with people. But there's a couple of more. And I want to leave you with these two, because I think these two for me are fundamental to really being able to start to move into this next phase of taking this action and starting to move forward. And these are all doable. I don't want anyone to think these are things that are just overwhelming. They are doable, but there's an intention to all of this, as I mentioned, that I really want to encourage all of you who now are inspired and motivated to actually start that next step of ultimately starting to step into that space and ultimately starting to occupy this transformative potential that we're, as a sector, right, as a body of people, a collective, really being able to have this transformation. And that is, I would like for you to build. How do you build? Again, it's very easy to write singular bullet point plans or sets of initiatives or activities, but really we need to be thinking about building all of these up, right? We need to be thinking about building out, building in. We need to think having an eye on essentially how we might ultimately do things, how we might want to transform, how we do our work, what sort of systems do we need to have around us, how do we create capacity and capability amongst those that we interact with, how do we not try to continuously center ourselves, so how do we decenter a lot of the work that we might be doing, which helps to position others, but ultimately how do we seed the ground? Also, to many of others who may want to occupy particular sets of roles, there's ways of starting to build this. So this becomes just a normal apparatus that's around you and a normal set of structures that you've got in place that is sustainable over time. You see this guy, this massive light, it's beautiful, but it is seriously kind of in my face of the sunlight starting to go down. So hopefully you can still see me and I'm not shimmering kind of too much. But I think this building is really quite critical, because the thing that we need to do is we need to constantly be thinking about how are we moving and building both our intentionality and our practice. How are we building the types of knowledge and understanding that we have? How are we creating frameworks and scaffolding transformation? Because some of you might think it's all about you. Like you are holding all of it for your organization, all of it for what you do. And in truth, you might be the conduit that is essentially trying to galvanize a whole set of other people to try to move them forward. But you will need to figure out how to build. You'll need to get some sense of what will inspire you. You will need to get a sense of how do you deal with anxieties? You'll need to get a sense of how do you deal with passion? How do you refuel How do you also find co-conspirators who may be in your own units, but they also might be outside? How do you build your teams so that they can also engage in this, so that it's not a singular person, and then once that person leaves, this type of work dies? I think this building is really quite critical, and I'm really hopeful that this conference and the type of structure and thinking that has been sort of laid before you has given you a sense of how to make connections outside of what you do with others, but also how to see yourselves as a collective force, right? So that you can now start to build collectively across the entire sector and into other sectors in a way that isn't just about any one singular activity or any one singular event, that really starts to build bigger. But I did have one more point. And that is, I think, even doing all of these things that I've described, the planning, the practicing, and the building, you have to take time to reflect. I think it's really easy to lose this sense of reflexivity and re-examination of your practice, of your actual plans, of your actual building, thinking not just critically of how you could have done X better. It's not that. It's really also, what was my thinking? What are the sets of assumptions that I have brought to the table when I've been building or engaging in a particular way? And how do I want to sort of transform that? How do I want to push it? How do I want to start to, give yourself the challenges so that you start stretching into different sets of thinking and different aspects of doing. And I'm hopeful that in a moment, when I turn things back over to Sophie, what we'll be able to do is give you a little bit of time to do that kind of reflection, where you can take all of the things that you've been hearing over the last few days, and especially some of the sort of, rubric that I've kind of been setting up about doing this work, and you take that moment of reflection and reflexivity, and then actually hopefully be able to continue that moving forward, because we really do need to be our own best friend in terms of trying to do this work and starting to ask and interrogate and understand and then connect with others. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for giving me the time. Thank you for giving me the challenge of trying to think through some of this with you and the space. And I really look forward to seeing what you start to produce as you're starting to think this through for yourselves and your own teams. So over to you, Sophie.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And that was challenging and inspiring in equal measure, I think. And I absolutely love just how it built on so much of what we collectively have been doing together. And that sense of, okay, so we've got some ideas about what we want to do. How do we actually go about changing that and bringing that into our daily practices, and that practicing not being perfect, that I love that piano analogy of just like we are learning, we're always learning, and we're not going to get everything right at the beginning, but it's still worth the practice in order to become better at the practice. And that sense of building and that sense of us building collectively. And I think now more than ever, we need to work collectively and decenter ourselves. So we, the NCC, we have no interest in being the center of this. We want to be a part of a collective that enables change against some of these long-term, deep-seated issues that we all face, and that space for reflection. And in a moment, we're absolutely going to offer you that time to reflect. But I'm going to hand over to Paul, because I think we're just going to have a quick conversation with you and ask delegates, maybe, are there any immediate responses to Karen or questions that you'd like to ask, and then we'll go into a period of reflection.
Yeah. Gosh, Karen, it feels like you've been with us in spirit for the last day and a half, because so much of what you said, I think, has reflected the conversations in the room, and seeing the applause and the feedback is great. I just wondered if anybody wanted to just reflect on what Karen said, anything that's really sort of struck you, that's really helped you in your thinking. We'd love it if one or two people wanted to speak out, or if you'd just like to reflect in chat on things that Karen has made you think. I think that's lovely, isn't it, Karen, when you speak, just to hear what people have heard. And that's what you get when you're in a room almost. You can see when people are reacting. So any reactions in the chat for Karen, I think, would be a gift. For me, I just loved that idea of build. you know, and that, yeah, it's so easy to get caught at the planning stage and to get preoccupied, but actually your challenge to us to practice, to build, to reflect, I thought that I'm going to, yeah, that's really helped me actually. So thank you. I really love that. Anyone prepared to sort of tell us what you took from that? And Alistair, it's lovely to see you sort of feeding in comments already. Advocacy for the value and responsibility of practice. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. And Sarah is saying, thank you, absorbing, reflecting. I think that's what perhaps all of us have taken away. And I think something that's come up a lot in sessions is people talking about imposter syndromes or feeling kind of anxious about their own expertise. And I think the flip side of that is almost what you've said, which is to constantly challenge yourself to work well. But I think that the downside of that, Karen, is that sometimes we can just feel overwhelmed with our inadequacy because the challenges are so great. And I wondered whether you had any reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, you can get caught in the conundrum, right, of reflection, not necessarily becoming inaction, but reflecting to such an extent that the issues become almost insurmountable, right? In terms of the amount of things that you need to start to try to keep alive in your head, and I think that's one of the reasons why for me I revert back to practice, because again, practice is such a useful vehicle for you to be able to move. Because I mean move in that more abstract sense, because you don't actually have to in that sense have solved the issue. That's not the goal. Isn't necessarily because you're connected to the work that therefore you're going to magically make all of these other sets of problems go away suddenly, or make them not exist. And I think that's the thing about what this can give you as a not quite as a tool, but I think more of the confidence to actually step into a space and not think I don't have the answers, I can't say anything, or I can't do anything because my work is so small. And I'm so committed to the butterfly effect, in the sense of you really just don't know what's going to be transformative. And what's going to have an effect on the type of work that you do. And we can sometimes put too much emphasis on these big, massive plans, thinking it's the plan that has done it, but it's actually going to be something else completely. Let me give you a quick little anecdote. I was almost on like another lifetime, century ago. It was end of term and at a university, and I was walking across the street. And there was a gentleman on the other side about to come on the other side of the street. So we were going to walk through the walkway, and the light changes colors. I could just see him just looking at us like, just really tired. And then we just happened to stop for a moment right before I stepped out, and he just said, it's really, really difficult right now. It's just really uncomfortable. Just because of the pressures and kind of studying, how was it like for you? And to which I had to go, well, I give the exams, I'm not taking them. And he was shocked by this, actually. He said to me, well, first of all, he stopped, and then he shook my hand, and his eyes filled with tears, and he said to me, I didn't think it was possible for a Black person to become an academic in the UK. You're the first person I've met who is a lecturer. He says, thank you. And he shook my hand, and he walks off, right? And it's just this moment where it was just like, this wasn't a massive event. It wasn't this this huge kind of purposeful type of bringing all the stuff together. It was literally me just walking the street. And it's been a very visceral moment for me to really remind myself that our relationships we have with people and the ways we relate and engage and the types of things we do, sometimes it's not because we've shouted the loudest or organized something that was so big that drew people. Sometimes it is literally these small things and that presence that I think in this case was very transformative for him. But it was also transformative for me, because it was one of those moments where I started to realize that, the work I do matters in so many different ways. And I need to keep recognizing that it's not necessarily the big shiny talks, right? It was crossing the street. It was like just a basic level types of stuff. And again, that's when you start to go, all right, this is what practice is like, right? Practice is like that. It's not necessarily the stuff where you sat with your pen and you put your stuff right now, I'm going to do my practice now, and I'm going to engage into my practice, right? You can actually start doing it very subtly and in various kind of simple ways. And I think you can start also taking more pressure off yourself that you have to resolve and have all the answers to everything really quite quickly. But instead you can actually fold into this type of practice in a way that is very energizing, as opposed to it being overwhelming.
Thank you, Karen. And I think it, I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody here, but I think a lot of us have found, the cultures of higher education hard to work in, and hard in terms of how much the work we do is valued and reflected back to us, and that kind of recognition is so important. And that has been something, Sophie, that we've been trying to address in terms of thinking about, so what can we all do to help create conditions where this kind of work can flourish? So I don't know, Sophie, whether you want to just sort of pull us back to our kind of conviction that out of these 2 days we can also take away some things we can do together.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Karen. I think that sense of the last thing we want engage or our communities to be acting in is to come up with shiny action lists and then go, job done, now let's go back to business as normal. And so we thought it was really important to start capturing some of the actions that we've been thinking might be useful, some of the small things that we can do that might change our practice. So if you remember, Esme yesterday was really encouraging us to take a step back. She walked to her rock and looked back at her organization and said, what have I learned? What can I learn? What should be changing? What should be staying the same? That sense of reflection. So there are loads of those kinds of things. And we're going to give you a few minutes now, and we're going to pop the Padlet link into the chat. If you want to go to the Padlet and have a look at some of the actions and think, okay, Karen's given us a real challenge. How do we take a plan that we're going to make and make it part of our practice? How are we going to build around that? And how are we going to take space to reflect on it? And so we invite you to go onto the Padlet. You might want to put up a post-it saying, this is my commitment to myself. These are the steps I'm going to commit to over the next week, before Christmas, over the next few weeks. What do you want to go back to be reminded this is what you started here, and what are you prepared to commit yourself to? And if you don't want to do it on Padlet, Padlet's helpful because it's a reminder to you that that's what you've committed to. But do it on a piece of paper, do it on your desk, and we're just going to give you I want to give you so much longer, but you know what? I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that. Obviously you need longer than that, but it gives you a start. It gives you a start in terms of thinking through how you might learn from what Karen's been sharing with us and change your practices. It's really humbling to see people adding some of the things that they're planning to do intentionally after the conference. And we, the NCCP team, are also going to be reflecting on what we've learned in terms of what we might intentionally do and how we might change our practices. And we welcome people to carry on conversation with us about what that might look like and how collectively we can work together for change. Karen, I'm going to hand back to you just for a second. We're just coming to the end of this session. We're lining up for the Watermark Awards in a few minutes. But Karen, I wonder, I'm not sure if you've managed to look at the Padlet, but I wonder, one final comment from you about what hope can we take for the future in terms of change, do you think, given the really sterling kind of tools that you've given us to think about change?
Hi.
That was a good question.
I have not looked at the Padlet yet, but I have been looking at everyone else looking at their Padlets and actually thinking and I think reflecting and even looking at the few things that have popped into the chat. What it feels like to me, looking at all of you, listening to all of you, I can feel the way that you're determined and I can feel your energy. And I literally have just one hope for you, is that you don't lose that. You don't lose that powerful energy that you feel right now, because it can get overwhelming in the day to day, and it can get some stifling. I know that many of you have talked also about, feeling potentially undervalued in your roles, issues around being invisible in terms of some of the work that you're essentially doing. And I want you to know, from me, that you matter. The work that you're doing is really important. And it's important not because of what you contribute to, but because you're you doing it. And I think, we've got to find those wells that continue to inspire us. And when those days get short and the moments get tense, I hope you can reflect back to this moment, look back at what maybe you put on the Padlet, and get inspired all over again, so that you can continue to do this work, because that is what it is. It is work, and it's work that is transformative, and so it won't always feel easy, but it is amazing, and it's galvanizing. So to see so many of you dedicating yourself to this, I'm going to take that inspiration back with me, and I hope you can do the same.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for such a brilliant keynote to draw our conference to a close. And I'm going to invite Paul back to the stage with me, and we just thought we'd share a few concluding thoughts for those of us able to still be here about what next. So Karen told us, I think, in her talk, that it's not enough to have an action list. We need to have take that into our practice and start really being intentional about how we work. And so we, the NCCPE, are definitely going to be taking forward a number of actions from this conference, and we'll be sharing with you our plans and the ways that you have influenced and shaped them over probably in January now, given that we're in the run up to Christmas now. We'll keep the Actions Padlet open for you. Please continue to use it to reflect and to think. We'll be also talking to the lovely funders who support our conference and look at some of the actions that are perhaps more relevant to the ways that they work, and think about how collectively we can work across all the different opportunities we have to really make a difference in society. Paul, I'm handing over to you for some final thoughts.
Yeah, I think that it's been a really moving couple of days for us, and I just wanted to echo what Karen said, that how sad I am almost not to be together, because I think that energy that we get from being in the same room is really something we've missed. But what you've helped us with, I think, is to just take stock. So I think we've made the best of our virtual world here, and it's been so lovely to connect, and it's given me so much to think about, actually. And I think, as Sophie said, just having December to settle a bit and to just draw breath and to take stock. And we feel, at the NCCPE, we have to keep changing and we have to keep moving. And I think there's so much richness in the feedback you've given us, and hopefully together, as we start the new year, we can really support each other. I just feel more than ever how much this is a team game, and it is so much about us together, and how generous and how kind we can be with each other to support each other, and how we can also, in that spirit of love, really challenge ourselves to be better. And Karen, I've just loved your closing remarks. They've given, I think, all of us a real tonic, actually, to just really take that time. So thank you, and thank you all for your involvement. It's been a joy.
Yes, and thank you so much for leaning in. Thank you for those who took part in corralling us all around the Unconference. What a rich experience that was. Thank you for those who suggested themes for the conference, and we hope that the conference reflected those themes. And thank you to all of you for being collaborators and colleagues and friends in the desire to see that, we make a really positive and beneficial difference with society in partnership with others. And so thank you so much. It's been great hanging out with you. And now now it's time to go. And normally this is a time where we all collapse into a chair and have a drink. So I'm hoping that you're planning to do that, but rather sadly, we haven't got a virtual way of doing it. So why not join the live stream? Why not grab yourself a drink, put your feet up and watch Jamie's live stream? I'm hoping he's got a bit more energy than the rest of us to enable us to really focus on what's happened over the last 2 days. Thank you so much for joining us.